下僕を相手にやってみなさい。どうしたの？ほら。さあ、状況を始めましょう。
Akiba's Trip is an action-adventure game for the PSP. Just before the sequel came out for PS3, an updated version was released for PSP in Japan entitled Akiba's Trip Plus. This version featured minor improvements to the graphics and animation, combat controls, and camera.
We learned about the Akiba's Trip game in Japan while the sequel was being heavily promoted in Akihabara. The original game was released in 2011 and the Plus game came out in 2012. We ended up picking up the Plus version for PSP, which came with a small art book and a soundtrack.
The game takes place in Akihabara, which is an otaku haven in Japan. This neighborhood contains tons of anime, manga shops, all kinds of nerdy stuff, maid cafes. It feels a lot like Yakuza in its design, except that, it focuses on Akihabara instead of Shinjuku. Like Yakuza, though, the game does a great job of bringing the essence of that neighborhood out. The game focuses a lot on otaku tropes, and is really focused on comedy, although a lot of that is lost because I don't speak Japanese. Some of it's funny and some of it is also really strange, like a segment where you have to go into a photo viewer-like mode and check out your little sister in her schoolgirl outfit in order to appreciate the schoolgirl fetish. Although it doesn't mention anything about the little sister fetish, which you'd think is a little more appropriate for that. But it's an example of the weird kind of stuff that the game goes into. In Akiba's Trip, the player controls a main character who's gone to Akihabara to search for his missing friend. There he's attacked by a Kageyashi, which is kind of like a vampire, and turned into one himself. He is saved at the last minute by Rei, another Kageyashi, who's fighting with her own kind. Afterwards, he meets up with a neighborhood watch kind of group who are trying to expose that vampire menace and decides to help them out. The game has 3 different factions. Your friends in Akihabara, who are trying to expose the vampire menace, the Kageyashi, who you can join up with, and Nero, who's a public safety kind of government agency who is trying to take down the vampires as well.
A map screen lets you choose which section of Akihabara you want to visit, and then you have the option to do different things like shop, search and hunt for vampires, or you can even fight regular people and get items from them. For the most part, though, the missions involve luring out and defeating vampires or fighting their bosses. One main difference between the Plus version and the original is that the Plus version included a lot more side quests and items. There are over 300 items and collectibles in that version. Depending on what choices you make throughout the game, the different factions will react and treat you differently. You'll also get different endings and side stories based on those choices. The main paths are joining the Kageyashi, fighting against them with Nero, or trying to establish a peace yourself.
While you're exploring the neighborhood, you can take pictures with your cell phone to find vampires. Many people will show up in the pictures, but anyone who's invisible you know for sure is a vampire and you can attack them on the spot. You can enter and exit battle mode at any time, and the controls are really interesting for this game. You have 3 attack buttons and a jump button. Each attack button targets a different part of the body, the head, the torso, or the lower half. In order to win a fight, either by killing a vampire or getting a normal person to run away, you have to strip them of all of their clothes, including any headwear they're wearing. So, using those different attack buttons, you can attack those pieces until they get damaged enough that you can rip them off by holding down the attack button. The point is to strip off the clothes, and if that person is a vampire, they will burn up in the light. You can steal some of the clothes you strip if you've learned certain skills which allow you to steal different kinds of outfits like business suits or schoolgirl uniforms or things like that. Once you've stripped off a piece of the outfit, you can also do a bit of a combo chain and quickly strip off many other pieces from different people around you. It's really handy for those fights where you're surrounded by multiple enemies, which happens quite often. If you try to strip off a piece before it's been damaged enough, you enter this tug-of-war kind of mini-game. And it's really tough to win unless you've already damaged that piece so close that it's almost ready to be pulled off. There's a dodge button as well that lets you dodge all incoming attacks, but it's kind of tricky to use. There's also unblockable attacks, which that won't stop. There's a decent combo system in the game, and you can unlock new moves as you go further into the game. Despite the improved camera in Akiba's Trip Plus, the camera still makes combat pretty tough. It's hard to focus on specific enemies, and it's always moving around to a place that makes it tough to see what you're doing. Because you can attack anyone in the game, when you get in fights with vampires or other people, random bystanders can jump in. Sometimes they'll help you by fighting the vampires, sometimes they'll attack you, and sometimes they'll attack each other. Getting new equipment is a big part of the game. You can get new headwear, shirts, pants, and accessories that increase your stats, making it harder for the enemies to pull clothes off you and having you burn up in the sun. Overall, the game sounds and plays pretty good, but there are some issues with it. One is the character pop-in. When you enter a new environment, important NPCs and characters, they won't show up right away. It can take up to like 10 seconds to appear. When the areas are pretty small, so typically by the time that happens, you've ran through half the area. And because most quests require you to talk to NPCs in those areas, once you enter, you have to wait to see who's in that area and who you can talk to before you can proceed. There's also a lot of slowdown in the game, especially in scenes where there are a lot of people on the street. So while overall the game looks and plays alright, the performance is not great. While the PSP is region free and the game is pretty easy to get a hold of, it's definitely not an easy game to play. The objectives make it almost impossible to play. A lot of the objectives involve having to use specific items, equip specific clothing, and do things to lure out certain vampires, and unless you're following a guide, it's almost impossible for you to do on your own. Luckily, there is a guide on GameFAQs, which is really high level. It doesn't explain exactly what to do, but it gives you enough ideas to know what you need to do to proceed through the game. It gives you the Japanese text for some of the specific items you need for certain objectives, and for the most part, you can figure your way through it. There's also no minimap with objectives marked, which can make it really tough. Unlike the Yakuza games, where it's easy to see where the next objective is, even if you're not sure what that objective is, this game doesn't have that, so you have to kind of scour the districts, figure out what to do, and like I said, use that guide if you're going to play this, because it's really essential if you can't read the language. Despite how hard it is to play, I still highly recommend it. It's a really fun game, and if you're into the series, it's really cool to see where it came from. Even though I don't completely understand the story, just what's told through the cutscenes and characters seem a little bit funner than the sequel. It's a really unique setting and a really unique game series, so it's worth checking out if you're interested.
The game is really interesting if you're a huge fan of the series. It's worth checking out if you enjoyed the sequels and want to play the original. If you're just a casual fan, though, you'd probably be happy just playing Akiba Strip 2, since it has a lot of improvements over this version. This one is, though, just neat to see the original characters in the story, if you are a fan of the whole series.
The game was followed up by a couple sequels. The first sequel was called Akiba's Trip 2 in Japan, and here it was called Akiba's Trip Undead and Undressed. It originally came out on the PS3 and had an updated version for the PS4. It's definitely worth checking out if you're into this kind of otaku culture. It's a lot like the original game, but everything is made better, and because it's on a console instead of a portable, you don't have those shortcomings with the graphics and performance. The next game in the series was Akiba's Beat, which is a completely different game, but it still takes place in Akihabara. The game is an action RPG in which the main characters get stuck in a repeating day loop. They have to do some dungeon crawling to figure out what's going on, and there's a lot of fun stuff in that. In Japan, there was a mobile and browser-only game called Akiba's Trip Fiesta as well.
There are manga adaptations of both the first and second game. They haven't been officially translated into English yet, though. Also, an anime was released with a similar pretense, but the characters and story are not the same as the games.
君は